It's so true that music and sound design can make or break a film. And I was thinking, the first thing I thought of was like, what are some films in which, we think that music or sound design just really was the thing that stood out to you the most, or really or broke, but in the case, what really made the film? And so I thought I would ask you guys to come up with some. I'll start, so you guys can think of some. For me, Zone of Interest, right? The sound design, which actually won an Oscar for it, but it would not have been anywhere near as great without the sound, the very unusual sound. The Sound of Metal was another one, both music and sound. Dunkirk, which everyone talks about cinematography, but for me it was the sound design. And Moonlight, music. I think that music was amazing. So those are just some thoughts I had. So I'll start with Jules. What are some films that you think, or television series that you think music or sound design just really stood out?
Y'all gonna laugh. It was my first movie I ever went to with my mom. It's called Flashdance. And don't laugh again. This is I think early 90s. The Hunger. Do you remember?
Hunger
Games. And something I recently watched called Lost Flowers of Alice. I think it's Alice Hart. Is that it? Have you seen it on Prime? Anyway, it's just so beautiful and very intimate and engaging.
Great.
But Flashdance.
Yeah. That was pretty seminal. The music, it was everything. Although it was supposed to be about dance, right? Yeah. Just.
Oh, yeah, sure. There's so many that are great, but the one that I saw recently was Poor Things, and the score in that is phenomenal. There's all kinds of reasons why. If you look at just musically, it's great because it's a very unique approach. Everything is very close mic'd and dry, and it's a small ensemble, which for a movie that's fantastic like that is a cool approach. That it makes everything feel very intimate, and technically it's also really well done. You can tell that there's a wonderful composer in the room with a wonderful director, and that they're dreaming up a lot of things together and just trying things out. They clearly had some time to do a good job there. And so that one was a big standout for me recently.
Yeah. Great.
Cool. Oh, I got mine. Well, recently I saw the new movie Love Lies Bleeding. I don't know if anybody saw that. And I thought the music and the choice of needle drops or whatever and the score were really interesting. The director, Rose Glass, told me that her partner is the one that really sourced out all this very interesting music that was almost like score, and these really cool songs, and somehow it really contributed to the emotion. It really connected me to the characters. I just thought it was beautifully interwoven. You didn't feel a difference really between songs and score, and you also just felt what the characters were. It really connected me to the characters. I just thought it was beautifully interwoven. You didn't feel a difference really between songs and score, and you also just felt what the characters were feeling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that, because as a director, I'm sure that I'm sorry, this is feedbacking here. Your relationship with sound design and music, how closely do you work with both the composer, sound designer? Kind of how does it fit into the whole framework of what you do?
Well, definitely it's a big part of what we do as directors. And so you're completely involved as much as you can be in everything. However, I am not a composer, so I would not be telling a composer, I want that instrument or whatever, and I think since we love to collaborate with a wonderful composer, but sometimes I have felt, even with Academy Award-winning composers I've worked with, that they weren't feeling it, or something, so you still have to go in there and, how can we feel more? What can we do? We've already, in one case, heard all this beautiful palette that you created up until this point, but now we need a new voice or something new, a new instrument. And so sometimes, as a director, we might have something to say to encourage a composer to push further or try something different. And but a lot of the times, of course, it's intimidating because you guys are experts. Don't want to say something too dumb. But definitely, I'm always asking. I try to hire the composer before we start shooting the film, and I try to so that I'm actually using his or her music when we start temping from day one in the editing room, instead of, well, we grabbed this from, Batman, and we grabbed this score from this, and then you've got some crazy mismatch. So I'm trying to, and if possible, if the composer can create some kind of a suite of music in advance, like some themes, so it'll be unique to the movie, instead of we stole it from some other temp score. And then, I don't know if you guys know the term, like temp love. Does anybody know that term, what that means? Yeah, it's like you fall in love with your temporary score, which you did steal it, you did borrow it from Poor Things, and so now, yes, you fall in love with the way that sound hits there, and then the composer comes in and he's like, I don't want to copy Poor Things, I've got to do my own thing. And it's so hard because you're in temp love. I don't know, maybe you have thought about that.
Oh, I mean, like you're right. Like we always have we have to deal with the temp music. I find that the composer's attitude towards the temp music can actually really make this process difficult or actually quite easy.
What do you mean by that?
And so the attitude would be two different ideas. Say you come into it and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe that they're using this again, or now they're in love with it and now I have to replace it, or it becomes like a bother. Or it could be a tool for discussion. And we can talk about, we can just look right at the temp music and say, so what's good about it here? What do we like about it here? What's it doing that we can grab? What can we learn from this? And then hopefully your composer is also in a situation where they have designed an entire palette, they've written themes for all the characters that everyone likes, and replacing the temp is simply being in a moment-to-moment movement with the music and the film, and you're using the palette that you've designed. And for me, I find if I do that, the temp music just kind of falls away, and it's not really a thing. Every now and again, someone will say, it's actually working better, or I'll check the temp music and say, well, did I do better? And if I haven't done better, then I'm like, okay, I need to rethink this. But I'll rethink it in a way where I'm inside the palette that I've designed for the film.
And when have you designed that palette, typically?
As early as possible.
So when would it be ideal?
Ideal would be in the script phase. Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Like, say it's done and you're casting, and we can just talk about the characters and what kind of theme they would have. Mm-hmm. That way we're really in our imaginations, which I think is an exciting place to be. And that's when essentially the melody is what we're going to write for the character. And so we don't even have to worry about how it's orchestrated yet. We can just work at the piano and get some notes and see how they feel, and does it resonate with the character?
And so that's kind of unusual. A lot of times people sometimes don't even hire the composer, or the studio won't even let you hire somebody sometimes until the picture is done, and that's when you've gotten locked into the temp more. But so let me ask this, if you are hired early and you created this palette, why are they using temp then? Why wouldn't they just use your palette?
Right, well, that could be a few reasons. One, they might need an actual piece of music that's finished and it sounds great for all the reasons that they have to.
That you have to go to.
Right, for all the executives that are involved, and for just your own spitballing and figuring out things and cutting. And so there's a lot of practical reasons, because we can't write the entire score up front, because we want to write to picture. Yeah. So that is one reason. Although I have worked with one director in particular, who had tried for at least 5 of the films that we did to edit with very little or no temp music in mind, because what he wanted to do was make sure that the edit worked without music.
So you weren't relying on the music too heavily?
I've heard that one before many times.
Yeah,
Like
it's
at film
amazing.
school, like if it doesn't work without music, then it doesn't work. And you're like, well, wait a minute. I don't buy that personally, because I believe that music and sound are so integral to your experience, and that when I've had a few editors try to pull that one on me, like, I'm not going to put any music in the movie, and I'm like, I can't even watch it.
Yeah.
Personally,
It
I
was
feel
impressive.
like I'm missing half of what you're doing here. But maybe some people love it.
Well, I mean, he's the only one that I worked with that did that. Well, actually, I guess two. There were two. And what was interesting is I'm not sure how they pulled it off, or if they just did it with temp and then they took it out and gave it to me. But like, it was really fun to go into a blank movie and start designing the themes and even spotting it from nothing with like no input.
Like someone hands you a blank slate.
Yeah. And you're like looking at the opening scene and you're thinking, wow, how can I make this really cool? Yeah. What can I do here to accentuate this thing, And
So that would be the case where you did not create a palette or anything before, and you didn't create any themes, and you waited until the moment the movie's basically almost locked, and they give you this blank slate. Is that how it worked?
that is how one of them worked. Yeah. But they had lots of time after picture lock, so he just gave it to me, and I said, do you want to talk about music? And he said, nope, I did all my work when I hired you, so just like do a pass. And like,
That's cool.
I know, but ironically though, I got really, really inspired by that, and it was a Portuguese filmmaker, and I got nominated for a Sophia Award for that, which is like their version of the Oscars.
In Portugal?
I know, so the Portuguese liked me.
No, I mean, I can see how that could be cool, very cool, yeah.
It was inspiring.
Do you ever get a director, and maybe it works if you work together for a while, where someone just goes, I don't know, just give me more oomph, or they're very vague? Because I remember I was talking to the cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto about working with Scorsese on Killers of the Flower Moon, but he's worked with him on a few other things, and he mentioned how they have a shorthand, and he can say, if he says oomph, he knows exactly what he means. Do you run into some of that?
I think so. There's directors that I've worked with a lot who they know how I write, and they kind of have a feeling for. Well, every director thinks that they understand my style, which is kind of fun. I'm like, well, this is what I do for you, but like, watch what I do for this other person. And but they have a feeling and an intuition about what I do, and then they will have certain things that they ask for. Like it might be a little more specific, like I think what we need here is your piano and strings thing, which is like a specialty of mine, is just like writing these like pretty piano melodies that go with like simple, poignant string parts. And so they might ask for something like that, or someone might say, we need your your scary analog synth thing here, or like whatever.
Your Ted Bundy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's that kind of thing.
So you talked about palette, and I thought, maybe we should talk a little bit about what that is when you come up with a palette, because everyone knows what a palette is for an artist, but can you kind of tell us a little bit about what an oral palette would be?
Yeah. A palette for a score would be think of almost like a band, or a certain branch of the orchestra, or the orchestra playing in a certain kind of style. So it would have instrumentation and style as a consistency. And then inside of that orchestration and style, you dial in the music for the scene. But you essentially like use the band, say they're just waiting in the wings, and you just choose who plays for this scene and pull it together and evolve the music through that style. And so
I've got a question. Would you also say, like, if you watch a certain film, a certain project, and you said, I really want to do this just really raw guitar, plucking, I'm only going to use 7 instruments in this. I'm not using any orchestration. I'm not. Would you call that also the palette? Like which instruments or what vibe or what feel you're creating for this movie?
Absolutely. Yeah, it would definitely. It could be anything, and the more creative, the better. Yeah, maybe we want to do something where we only use 2 of the strings of the guitar, only the low ones or something, and one synthesizer from 1965 or something like that, and you just like put that together, and it could be really fun.
I had a wonderful, opportunity to work with Carter Burwell, composer. He did Twilight, and so he thought at certain points, and we did the score and Aaron Lyndhurst in London, blah blah blah, amazing. Anyway, it was awesome, but he called his guy out there and he told him, go to the sheet metal junkyard. I want a metal blade like this that we're going to scrape in this scene. And so he had this guy in London go and make these weird, funky sounds, and that was part of course he had strings and other great things too, but he made, and I've worked with many people, you've probably done it.
So yeah, integrating like
where you make
non-instruments,
sound a special way,
or even
time somebody put on Red Riding Hood, they put like actually a balloon or like a condom on a mic and plunged it into a watermelon and squished it all around,
almost like Foley artists.
But creating a great sound and then tweaking that. What's your most fun, crazy sound thing you've made?
That's a great question.
That is pretty great. Wow, I'm trying to think of what is the most outlandish thing I've done. I've had so many sessions where I do weird stuff like that, whether it's just having someone on the other side of a kick drum and I'm singing into the drum and they're just recording on the other side of the drum. And there's things like that, or
singing, so incorporating voice.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you have to really be thinking on your feet a lot of times too, right? You wouldn't have walked in that morning thinking that. It's like, let's try this. So are you constantly?
Well, yeah, there's that. There's dreaming things up, and I also put a lot of interesting instruments in the studio so that I try to think differently about them. So I have this old banjo that I bought a while ago. That's just this tenor 4-string banjo that's probably at no point was ever expensive, and the strings are super old, and I love to bow it. And play strange melodies on it, but I also use it to play percussion. I'll rub it really softly and play the back of it. I'll use it for all kinds of things, or I'll pluck it in a way where I can almost treat it like a synthesizer pattern and quantize it really tight, but it has this other sound to it that's not electronic, but it kind of moves like an electronic thing. And I love, go ahead.
You better not talk too much about some composer's going to sneak in and steal it.
They're going to be like, I need to get a banjo. I'm like, you'll never get this banjo.
The magic banjo.
I had to go down to El Segundo to get that banjo, and I bought it from this really crusty dude. And I said, I was like, well, I'm a composer, and he's like, yeah, everybody's a composer. So I'm like, okay. Yeah, everybody. We all are.
Jules, I wanted to ask you as a documentarian, because score. We tend to think of score with narrative films and sort of the suspense and all that. So how do you approach score in making the films that you do, which are very emotional documentaries?
So for me, just a little bit of a backstory. I grew up in Northern Ontario, so for the most part, we didn't have electricity or water. And my grandparents were hunter-trappers, so they lived off the land. And so there was a lot of stillness and, the sound of wind. And sometimes we had our radio going and the static and the sound of scraping hides. So all this was how I grew up, and also growing up with a hearing impairment. So I rely very heavily on someone who's very dear to me, my sound designer, Dave Chick, who worked with me on a lot of projects. I call him my ears because I don't hear everything as clear as everybody else. It's kind of muffled, if that makes sense. So I also go by like how something feels. Like if in Wapike, there's a scene in my feature film called Wapike, which means tomorrow. There was an elder in my community that, you know, he would go out on the land and he would go before the sun came up. And I asked him what the meaning of truth was, and he said is when the world wakes. So there's that one scene, if you've watched Wapike, where the sun is coming up and then you feel the rumble. You feel that, because you can feel it here, right? So anyway, so that is his definition of truth, is when the world wakes, and that's when the birds wake, and the insects, and the animals, and then there's a rumble to the earth. So anyway, so when I go into any project, like scripted or documentary, I like to start from a place of stillness. Like, what are the actual natural sounds, you know, and what's informing the beats or the story beats, or, you know, and especially with Wapike, when we're talking about the 215 children that were unearthed, you know, what does that do to your senses? Like, what does that do to your heart, you know, and everything? So when I talk to a composer or a sound designer, I kind of talk about my emotional feelings throughout the story, if that makes sense. Okay, this is where I'm super frustrated. What sound will work here? And then